I'm going to grab my water.
Find out where to stand. I think here is fine because I cannot see anything because of the light. So, dear members of the International Friends Circle, dear guests, a very warm welcome. Good evening. It's a pleasure to invite you tonight to the book reading, The Guilty Can Say Goodbye, and to the discussion with our author, Mariam.
Dankeschön.
Actually, we had Mariam here in 2020 with her first book, The Messy Mobile Life, and we had a very nice presentation and even more nice discussion, very open-minded discussion afterwards, and I'm looking forward if we have those discussion after the book reading with Mariam, because I think it's worth it. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time why we, and especially me, invited Mariam. First of all, because her mother-in-law, Maris, did send me her second book. So I'm following Mariam for the whole time. So she did send me the book, and I was reading the book, and I said, very nice, she wrote a nice book. And I think it's important that we share that message. But it's not only because of that, because she's not only a vibrant and very intelligent person, but she's a person that shares the message of her experience in embracing different cultures, different languages, and having lived in different countries, being a foreigner herself. And I think in this divided times of hatred speech, of heated speech, and always focusing on our differences, we need more of bridge builders like you. She's not only an author, she's a woman, she's a wife, she's a mother to 3 lovely children that we see tonight here with you. So welcome. She has maybe lived a very different life from like a lot of us did, maybe staying in our hometown, traveling and embracing cultures, but she has been a foreigner. I know it a little bit from my past, traveling with my husband and family. It gives you a lot and it enriches you embracing cultures. And I think we really need to spread the message of, and the positive message of people like Mariam and her husband Martino, that even live in an intercultural, interreligious, interlanguage marriage, and it works because their message is love. And I think if we embrace that and we really focus on what unites us, we can go against the hated speech and the dividing that we see in all the public, not only in America, and I don't want to focus on America, but also here in Europe and in Germany, and all by ourselves, that we need to decide to say no when we see things like that happen. So we're looking forward to a brilliant evening, and the stage is yours, Mariam. Thank you very much.
Dankeschön. Thank you so much. Vielen Dank. Guten Abend. Ich beginne auf Deutsch zuerst und dann auf Englisch. Aber ich möchte auf Deutsch sagen, danke für die freundliche Einladung zu dem IFK. Und ich möchte auch das sagen, dass ich habe vor, meine Präsentation auf Englisch zu halten, aber meine Folien sind auf Deutsch, weil ich möchte, dass alle können verstehen oder vielleicht lesen und hören oder vielleicht beides. Ich habe ein bisschen Deutsch gelernt, als ich habe in Berlin gewohnt, nach meiner Hochzeit. Ich habe ungefähr 9 oder 10 Monate in Berlin gelebt und da ein bisschen Deutsch gelernt. Und ich möchte eine herzliche Willkommen sagen. Und ich denke, dass nach dieser heutigen Präsentation können gerne Fragen stellen auf Englisch oder sowohl auf Deutsch oder auf Urdu oder Hindi oder Italienisch oder Portugiesisch Twi, Mandarin oder Dänisch. Arabisch kann auch gut klappen. Ja, ich habe versucht, alle diese Sprachen zu lernen, aber leider ja, mit hoch unterschiedlichen Erfolg. Ja. So, ich muss auch sagen, ganz ehrlich, dass ich habe einen völlig neuen Respekt für Übersetzer gewonnen, weil das Guilty Can't Say Goodbye klingt poetisch auf Englisch, aber wenn man übersetzt auf Deutsch, die Schuldigen können sich nicht verabschieden. Das klingt nicht so gut, oder? Ja. Deshalb Dank an meine Schwiegermutter, die den Titel weitaus eleganter als die Schuldtragenden übersetzt hat. Und ich denke, das passt besser zu. Vielen Dank, Mama. So, jetzt auf Englisch. We'll start the presentation and go ahead. So. Ich möchte, oh, I'm sorry, still in Deutsch mode. I'd like to start off by asking one of my favorite questions, and that is, what do we all have in common? And I love to look at the place, the organization, and the book, and the message of the book. And I'm really excited to be launching The Guilty Can't Say Goodbye here in Wolfsburg, because here in Wolfsburg is where I started my own multicultural life. I am married to a Wolfsburger, and this is where our multicultural life began. But more than that, I think that Wolfsburg is such an interesting place because it's a... Sorry, I hope that wasn't me. Wolfsburg is such an interesting place because it is a place full of people who have migrated here. And there are so many people in this city, in this room today, who have such multi-layered identities and complex histories and personalities and identities because they have come maybe from a different culture and have settled here in Wolfsburg. I was just speaking to Jana Sievers from the Wolfsburger Nachrichten, and you told me there are 160 different cultures, around 160 here in Wolfsburg. So I think that to launch a book and to be in conversation with each other about multicultural identities, what better place can there be than to be here in Wolfsburg, right? And of course, I'm here through the invitation of the Internationale Freundeskreis Wolfsburg, which is an organization that is committed to intercultural exchange and cross-cultural dialogue. And I think that that ties in very nicely with my book, The Guilty Can't Say Goodbye, because in this book, I explore two central themes. The first one is, can we ever escape our past? Can we ever forget who we used to be? Is that even possible? And secondly, can moving to a new country give us the chance to really embrace our true, authentic selves? And these are the questions that we explore in the book and through my characters, who I will introduce to you as well. But first, we're going to talk a little about how the different phases of moving and migration look like. And of course, I start off with a quote. This is a quote from the book, that home is not a place. It's a story that comes with you. It's not a place that you leave behind. It's actually a story. Home is a story for you and for me. And no matter where we go, that story comes with us. And so what is that story? Do we ever share that story with other people? that is a question that we explore through literature. And I have here 3 different ways that people move in today's society. Expatriation, Auswandern, immigration, Einwandern, and then Flüchtlinge and Asylsuchende, that's of course refugees or asylum seekers. And you may think that all 3 of these are very different ways to move to a new country. And in fact, there are many books that have been written on each different experience. For example, for expatriation, Auswandern, you have a book called The Expats by Chris Pavone, which is a book about 2 American expats who moved to Luxembourg. Immigration, you have many, many authors writing about immigrating to a new country. You've got the famous Jhumpa Lahiri, who's written The Namesake. You've got so many authors, like the Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's written a book called Americana. And of course, as far as refugees and asylum seekers are concerned, you have books like Exit West, which explore the refugee experience and what it's like to move without privilege. But what I wanted to do today was to show you how it's not easy to separate people so clearly anymore in 2025. Because the characters in my book, they're not refugees, but they're still running away from something. They're running away from their old lives. And so often we have to ask ourselves, are we moving because we want to run towards something? Or are we moving because we're running away from something? And that's the kind of complexity that I think is important to show in today's literature, to show that it's not so black and white. And I also want to say that an expat could easily turn into an immigrant if they decide to stay longer in a certain place, and vice versa. So actually, you've got a lot of fluidity between these terms, and how we look at people who move and how we look at people who migrate really ends up constricting that, as opposed to, enlarging the box. We tend to put people in one box. And what I'm trying to do is to make sure that we can see that people don't belong in just one box. And I think many of us fall into a category that we would call ourselves an economic migrant. In fact, I have such an example in my own family. My Italian father-in-law came to Germany, came to Deutschland as a Gastarbeiter, like many people who came here as Gastarbeiters in the 60s. And he ended up staying here and building a life here, finding a job, marrying a German, raising a family. And I think that that is the story, that's the complexity of many people, especially here in Wolfsburg, who have come from another country and then made this their own. And so it's very interesting to see how economic migration has its own face of moving. And I just wanted to share a little bit about how expatriation is different from immigration. And I think it's an important difference to point out, because everybody thinks, why do you use the word expat? It reeks of colonial heritage. It reeks of privilege. But I think that using the word expat is still important in 2025. What is an expat? An expat is someone who lives abroad in a different country, but does not have the right to stay in that country, does not have citizenship, cannot legally stay there indefinitely. And me and my husband and our family, we are serial expats, currently living in country number 10, that is Portugal. But we never have the right to stay anywhere. When we lived in Dubai, in the UAE, we could only stay there till we had an employment visa and we had a job. We could only stay in Singapore if we had a job and the right visa. We don't have the right to live in these countries. We don't even have the right to citizenship in many of these countries, like in the UAE. So that is what an expat is. An expat is someone who lives abroad without ever being able to become a citizen of that place. And I think that that's an interesting difference to point out in terms of its difference with immigration. I wanted to talk a little bit about multicultural identities and what that actually means. So you can see that I have a definition. Who and how are you multicultural? And of course, you could, be multicultural in many ways. You could have a different cultural influence at home, either through marriage, or you could be multicultural because you reside in a different country, you've moved to a new place. But aside from definitions, the importance of multicultural identities is that they outperform monocultural societies, whether it's in the economy, whether it's in the job market, whether it's professionally or personally. And multicultural teams are known to perform better. They have communication advantages. They express more understanding, more respect. They work better. And so it's incredibly important in our globalized society that we have multicultural teams who are working for better success. But then comes the narrative. And the narrative is very important. Where are these multicultural identities in today's stories? Do you ever read about them in a book? Do you ever hear their story in a book? Do you have access to their stories? When was the last time you read about them in literature? And the famous, sentence that's often said to people like me, go back to where you came from. It's not that easy. Where would you go back to? I don't know. I have citizenship of a country I've never even lived in. Do I go back there? Would I feel at home there? I don't think so. I also have citizenship of the country that I was born in. Do I go back there, even though I don't really know how to function in society there? I've never had a job there, never given birth there, never paid a bill, never even done laundry there. Is that where I'm going to be successful? And I think that, as Frau Stackmann was saying, in today's society, it's very easy to fall into this us versus them dichotomy. I'm German, she's not. It's not that easy anymore to say that. My 3 children who are sitting there are all German citizens who have never lived in Germany. And I think that our complex identities need to be brought to the forefront. This is how we become more perceptive and aware. We refuse to put people into boxes. We refuse to adhere to a dichotomy that doesn't really make sense in 2025. And this is really, of course, what I am passionate about doing through my writing. I think that this is one thing, but I also want to say that being multicultural is nice, but being open to multiculturalism is very important, especially in today's world. You don't need to live abroad, you don't need to take fancy trips abroad, but the fact that you're all here, listening to a diverse author like myself, is a big thing. Thank you for coming, because this is how you are open to being multicultural, and you're open to multiculturalism. You are here listening to me talk, not in your native tongue, and you're still here. And I think this is what we need to highlight in today's society, that you came to listen and you took a chance and you kept an open mind. And that is how you are open to being multicultural. You give people a chance. You show up and find out, what can I learn from them? And they may be very different from me. They may have led a very different life from me, but I think I can still learn something from them. And I think that is really what I hope to achieve through my writing as well. And I think that showcasing multicultural identities helps us to do just that. So, I wanted to introduce you to my multicultural characters. I deliberately chose 3 women from 3 very different corners of the world to be in this book because I wanted to show you how different people's experiences can be. So I have 1 South Asian, 1 North American, and 1 West African woman who all moved to Europe. They all moved to Portugal. And you can read a little bit about each character, how different they are. Fatma, she is born in Pakistan. She's lived in the UK, Denmark, and in Dubai. And she's raising a third culture daughter, a third culture kid. And third culture, there's a bit of an explanation about it because your first culture is your legal culture, your passport culture. Your second culture is the country you live in. But third culture kids, they don't live in the first culture or the second culture. They create their own third culture in between. And so she's raising a third culture kid who's half Pakistani, half German, born in Copenhagen, raised in Dubai, who she moves with to Portugal. And this is your brown person of color. I really want you to be in her shoes because you may not be her, but the beauty of literature is that you can open a book and be in someone else's shoes. So that's who she is. And then you've got a very different character called Kate, who's Texan. She's from the US, but she's left Texas as soon as she could, moved to Massachusetts, and said goodbye to her tiny world. She's a diplomat, and she moves around the world because of her career. And she is married to someone who also has a hybrid personality, an Italian-American, a second-generation Italian-American, who cooks a wonderful risotto for her one day in the book, and the recipe is also in there for anyone who wants to steal that. But she also is raising a third culture kid who was born in China but grown up in Mexico, Singapore, DC, and then in Portugal. And she's, very different from Fatma. She's an agnostic, she's Caucasian, she's white. She has a lot of privilege on the face of it. But as you can see, they have a lot of things in common, even though they aren't similar at all. Last but not least, you have Abena, who's born in Ghana. She's a Black woman from Ghana. And she has moved from Ghana to the UK, and she's married to someone who also has a very multicultural identity. Her husband is Black and British. He's Ghanaian and British. And they are raising twins who are also third culture kids who feel a bit more British than Ghanaian. But she's a staunch Christian. She's, your person of color, and she's your experience of what it's like to move when you're Black. And of course, all 3 of these women moved to Portugal, and you would say, okay, how different can the experience be if they're all moving to the same place? And of course, that's what I wanted to show. The answer is very different, because so much of what happens when we leave our home depends on 2 things. It depends on the place, and it depends on the person. But how much does it depend on the place? And how much does it depend on the person, on us? And that is the interesting battle that I explore through my characters, because all 3 of them move to the same place, to the same city, but yet they have very different experiences based on who they are and what their lives have been. And that is the kind of complexity that I wanted to show, that diversity, not just in background, but also diversity in experiences and diversity in perspectives. And they're very different. Fatma's a writer, Kate's a diplomat, and Abena is an entrepreneur. But they become friends when they move abroad and they live abroad in Portugal. And through their friendship, they start to become more secure about who they are, and they have to sort of find their way. They're very flawed characters, so it's interesting to see them finding their way. They're so busy trying to create a new life, but the problem is they have all these deep, dark secrets from their old life that keep pulling them back in, so that's a little bit of where the tension comes from. some of the important themes that I explore in the book and also wanted to share with you today, first of all, is guilt. Everybody I talk to feels guilty for something or the other. How many of you in the room right now are feeling guilty for something you may have done or something you may not have done? Maybe you could raise your hand. Yeah. I think guilt is such a universal emotion. We carry so much guilt with us. And it's interesting to see, why do we carry so much guilt? Why does the guilt come with us even if we get on an airplane and cross a border? Is the guilt with us in our suitcase or in our baggage? How can we get rid of it? And this is something my characters are struggling with. They are always feeling guilty for some reason or another. So how much of it is just an inherent part of life, of being a human, and how much can they actually control? So that's the first thing. The second theme is, of course, Zugehörigkeit, belonging. Who are we and where do we belong? This is almost a lifetime question for many of us, and so is it for my characters as well. They are trying to find belonging through place, through experiences, through friendships, and can they ever belong to a place, or can they only truly ever belong to themselves? That's a question I think many of us probably have asked ourselves. Can we belong to a place completely, or do we first need to learn how to belong to ourselves? So this is something that my characters are struggling with as well. And last but not least is this whole question of redemption. How can they get redemption? How can they really come to terms with their past? How can they accept their present? And how can they move forward? How can being in a new place give them the courage to truly embrace their true, authentic selves? As you can see, the themes are very universal. So even if you've never lived abroad, I think you'll see a lot of yourself in the story, because belonging and sense of home and finding that redemption for ourselves is something we all share in common. And there are, of course, other themes as well. There are the themes of, friendships. How can making the right friendships help us in life? Can they make us braver? Can they make us nicer? Can they make us more adventurous? Can they make us trust more? These are some of the things that we also, my characters explore. And, of course, another important theme is food, because often I find it's very difficult to express your identity, but sometimes it's easier to express it on a plate. So in my novel, you'll see my characters are cooking a lot of food, and I thought it was only fair that I include the recipes of the dishes that they are cooking, so you can cook them as well in case your mouth is watering as you're reading. I share the recipe for a risotto, as I mentioned. I share the recipe for a chicken biryani, and I share the recipe of jollof rice, which comes from Ghana. And I think that relating to one another through food and through inviting someone and showing up, this is me on a plate, what do you think? Is a great way to also be multicultural. It's a great way to expand our own horizons and understand a different culture, different cuisine, and different flavor. So there are so many ways we can be open to one another, and food is definitely one of them. Last but not least, I wanted to talk a little bit about storytelling, and why is storytelling so important for us today? The first thing I have, of course, first of all, I should say that I think great stories inspire us to see the world in a different way. And storytelling is so key because it can help us do three very important things. The first one is self-discovery. It can actually help us understanding our own past experiences to create our future selves. This is something we all need to do. And this is something we are usually doing. We don't realize it consciously, but we're always telling stories. We're always sharing stories, whether it's with our partner or with our friends or with our colleagues at work. So sharing your story helps you on the path of self-discovery. So don't stop sharing those stories. They are important for a reason. Second of all is connection, Verbindung. As human beings, we connect to each other through storytelling. This is how we are built. If you tell me a story about your life, I am all ears. I want to hear what happened when you were on your way here. Did you hit traffic? Was the sun shining? Were you in a good mood? Did you see something? Were you annoyed? This is how human beings relate to one another. So it's about relating first to yourself, but then also using storytelling to relate to the other person sitting across from you. And last but not least is a very important question of ownership. Who gets to tell the story? And this is a very hot button topic, especially in today's societies. In literature, publishers will tell you, you can only tell a story if you are that person, right? Or if you come from a certain place. I don't know how many of you read a book called American Dirt by an author called Janine Cummins, who wrote about what it's like to be a Mexican migrant crossing the border from Mexico to the US. And she got massively criticized because everybody told her, but you're not Mexican. How dare you write about the Mexican experience when you're an American woman sitting on the other side with so much privilege? And that really begs the question, so what kind of stories do we have ownership to? What can we share? For example, you could tell me, Mariam, you only have the right to share a story that's set in Pakistan, that's about Pakistanis, and that's it, because that's where you were born. I would argue back, well, I actually feel better qualified to tell you a story set in Portugal, because that's where I live right now, and that's where I'm observing society. That's where a lot of my life experience has taken place. And so in publishing, when you try to tell stories from many different point of views, the publisher will tell you, okay, you need something called sensitivity readers. People who are from a particular culture or profession who are going to read your work and make sure you haven't misrepresented anything or inaccurately, represented something that could be offensive. For example, I was told by my publisher, okay, you lived in Ghana, you can write about a Ghanaian woman, such as I have, but you're not a black woman. You don't know what it's like to be black abroad, do you? So you have to have your work read by someone who is of that country, who has had that experience, who can tell you in case you've misrepresented anything. So this is a big question, and it's a big question on my mind as well. Who has the ownership to a story? Can only Germans write about Germany? Is that what gives us legitimacy? Or can anyone who has moved to Germany share what their experience has been like from their point of view? We need to widen the scope, and that's how we increase our understanding of hearing different voices through different perspectives, and that we don't have a monopoly on storytelling. So widening the scope is very important as well. And that's also something that I aim to do as a writer. I aim to show you a very multicultural story and argue that I have a right to share that story. We all do. We all have the right to share our experiences. And I think that is where the richness lies, in producing that complexity. So I think storytelling, to sum up, is a huge privilege, and it's not one that we should be taking for granted. I am going to do a little book reading from page 87 and 88. This will take maybe a minute. And in the part that I'm going to read out, you have a scene between Fatma, who's Pakistani, and her German husband named Stefan. Does that sound familiar? So here we go. Stefan looked over to the little stand selling roasted chestnuts and inhaled the rich, smoky aroma. Stefan's command of Portuguese wasn't up there with hers, so she helped him order, and they meandered over to Park Eduardo to sit and enjoy the chestnuts together, just the two of them for a change. "You okay, honey?" she said. "You seem a bit quiet." Scheiße. Stefan had burned the tips of his fingers trying to peel a hot chestnut. "Yeah, I guess. All this, it's the most wonderful time of the year in December. Oh, it's the most difficult time of the year if you're an expat living abroad and your family is guilt-tripping you for not coming home for Christmas. Listen, maybe we should take a short trip to see your mother in Berlin." "I don't know. It would mean a lot to her. Even Maya has been asking when she'll see her Oma next. I guess a few days in Germany over Christmas would be manageable. We could finally take Maya to a German Christmas market. She has school holidays, so we have plenty of time." "Well, that would be nice. Okay, I'll look for flights once we're back home. Just a short visit, though, to meet with close family members. 4 or 5 days max. Each time I go back to Germany, it's difficult." Fatma knew what he was saying. Going back home was something they looked forward to and dreaded at the same time. It was an uncomfortable feeling, realizing you had outgrown a place. It was something that just happened over time. The more you learned about your new country and the more you adapted to it, the more out of sorts you felt in your passport country. And the people who were still living there weren't particularly interested in hearing about your life abroad. So that was a little bit from The Guilty Can't Say Goodbye. And on that note, I shall end the presentation, and if there are any questions, we can have a Q&A. We have some time for Q&A. And of course, my book is also available in case anybody wants to read more, and I shall be more than happy to sign it for you today as well. So thank you very much. I don't know if I should grab my water.
So now it's the time to ask questions. I have to say, listening to just the words, I remember like we felt we have been experiments and really difficult. And I'm back in Germany and I'm still struggling. I know I'm German, but I embrace so much of the other cultures. And then I can see that my children are like, oh, those Germans again. And it's really something that you need to learn. And so if you have questions tomorrow, I will let you come around, give you the microphone, and we start a discussion on whether how to feel guilty or not to feel guilty, wherever you live. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Hello, Mariam.
Hi.
Yes, I'm interested about in your work to write a book. How much time, what do you think, how much time did you spend on writing a book from first reflection or the first idea of, yes, I will write a second book, a novel, and yeah, until the day you finished it?
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, I'm very happy to share more about the process of writing this book. I got the idea one day. I was going out to meet a friend. I was late. I am not late normally, but my biggest handicap is that I am geographically challenged. So I was lost, which ended up being late. And I was looking for a cafe in Lisbon. I went to the wrong cafe, and instead I was walking down a street, and I just saw there was so much activity around me. There were people coming in, coming out. There were grandmas looking out of the window, spying on their neighbors. There were children playing outside. And I thought to myself, wow, I live here, but I don't know anybody's stories. And I want to know their stories. I want to know, who are they? Who have they been? What makes them who they are today? And so that is what prompted the writing of this book in 2021. And initially, of course, you have all the ideas. You brainstorm, you sit down, you plot, you plan. I had a big cork board, and I had Post-its of colorful Post-its for each characters. And that's how I plotted the book in 2021. And it took me about maybe 3 months to do that. And then I actually started writing in 2022. And when 2022 started, I had only one goal, which was to write the first messy draft. Just one goal, keep it simple. And at the end of 2022, I had the first draft. And then 2023 was brutal, because you get an editor, a developmental editor who tells you everything that's wrong with your book. And you feel hopeless, you feel dejected, but you have to pick up yourself. And so I would sit in cafes and I would bribe myself. If I can write 1,000 more words, then I get a brownie. If I write 1,500 words, I get a coffee as well. That's how I, rewarded myself. And in 2023, the manuscript went through a lot of edits. So I had a developmental editor sitting in the UK who edited the book. And then I had 6 beta readers and sensitivity readers who read the book and gave me their feedback. I had 2 American diplomats who serve in the Foreign Service read the book. One is a diplomat and one is a diplomatic spouse, because I wanted equally their different opinions. I had a Ghanaian woman read the book who lives in Germany. She actually lives in Göttingen and is attending the university there. I even had a Pakistani sensitivity reader, because I thought anybody could argue, you haven't even lived there long enough. What do you know about the culture? Maybe I've made some mistake there. So I had a Pakistani writer living in Dubai read the book. I had a marriage counselor read the book, because one of the couples in the book goes through marriage counseling. So all these people then give you their feedback, and then you have to take all of that into account. So a lot of revisions, a lot of drafts. And then towards the end of 2023, it was maybe, the 600 draft that you decide with your editor. The editor tells you, look, Mariam, a book is never finished. It just ends on an interesting note. And that's when you know, okay, you've done enough editing. And then 2024 was all production and design. You have to trust a lot of different people to come up with, the cover, the look, the format, all of that. And you need at least 3 to 4 months, maybe even 6 months just for that. And so that's sort of how the process was for this book, where it easily took me about 3 years, I would say, from start to finish. So it's a long process, yeah. Yeah, patience is key, yeah. Yes, of course. Let me give the mic. Yes, of course.
The standard process for creative literature currently, that you have sensitivity readers, that you have to have a reader who checks whether everything you write about American diplomats, who are quite different now than they were 2 years ago.
Yes.
That's all required in order to produce the work that you have to sort of, apart from the creative process, you have to go through so many checks.
Yes, it's
openness and multiculturalism, and it sounds like little boxes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a fascinating process to go through. I think I had to jump through more hoops because I was writing about such diverse people that everybody wanted to make sure that every aspect was well presented, every voice was authentic. So I definitely had to jump through more hoops. Had I just been writing about a South Asian woman from India or Pakistan, I'm sure I wouldn't have had to jump through so many hoops. But because I was writing about a Pakistani married to a German, and an American married to an Italian American, and a Ghanaian married to a British Ghanaian, and they're moving to Portugal, and I have so many words in the book that are German, Italian, Portuguese, Urdu, Hindi, Danish, Arabic, that it was important that it gets read from multiple angles as well. So in a way, I'm grateful to have more eyes on it, because when you're writing a book, you're so close to it, you can't see it anymore. You need someone who has never read it, who has that distance to tell you this is working, this is not working, because you're so far in it, you don't know anything by that point. So yes, especially if you write a multicultural book like I have, people will put in those extra checks and balances. I think that's a requirement of publishing today, and for better or worse, at least when your book is published, you're confident that you haven't written something that could be offensive to anybody. So maybe some peace of mind, in the end is worth it. But of course, this is a book for a global audience, and it's meant to be read by people from every culture. You could be a Ugandan living in Paris, you could be an Australian living in the Congo, and you could still relate to the book. That's what it's about. That it doesn't matter really who you are or where you live, because the topic of guilt, belonging, finding your way, finding your voice, anybody can relate to that, right? Thank you for your question.
I have a question on that as well.
Yes.
In terms of the sensitivity readings, what are in a way, yes, it's good, but in another way, it sounds like you take boxes, and that in itself becomes a stereotype, is it not?
Very interesting question. Thank you so much for your interesting and thought-provoking question. I think that it's a fine balance, really. Because again, what is that saying? That only someone who's from that culture can be an authority on that culture, right? So yes, you have to take it with a grain of salt. And in the end, you do have to make, as the author, you do have to make a decision. Do I listen to this person's feedback? Do I take it into account? Or do I firmly believe what I have written is correct? So you do have that creative license. I think the most important thing, though, is to ask for that feedback, and then you get to decide how you want to take that or how you want to incorporate it. And sometimes you may decide, no, I don't want to incorporate it. Sometimes you and your editor may decide, nope, it's fine the way it is. But then at least you've anticipated, okay, this could come up. So either way, you are better for just making the effort. And it's interesting how we assign authority to different people. I lived in Ghana for 2 years and was very deeply immersed into life there. So when I describe what it's like to go to a market in Accra, nobody can tell that I'm not Ghanaian, right? But when I'm describing what it's like to be a Black woman, my child has maybe broken their leg and needs an X-ray done, and I'm rushing to the hospital. I don't speak Portuguese. Then there's a bit more nuance, right? What is my experience as a Black woman not speaking the language of the country that I have moved to? There I might need a Ghanaian's perspective. So I think my point is to show that it isn't black or white. It's very subjective, and you can really take different people's input into account and then make up your own mind and say, okay, this is what I think should be the case, and this I don't need. So yes, I hope that answers your question. Yes.
I'm asking a question, Sophie. First of all, just relax. I grew up with Karl May. He has never been to any place outside Germany. So, just one question. You're describing 3 characters, and I think, obviously, there's one which is most similar to your own life, right? Fatma's life. Which character was the hardest and the easiest to love? And which character does your husband love most from the book?
Exactly. Stimme zu. Maybe the last question should be answered by my husband. I don't know, actually. I've never asked him that. Thank you for your question. I think that I get asked this question a lot. So I've launched the book in Portugal, all over Portugal, in Porto, in Lisbon, in Cascais. I've launched the book in Pakistan, of course, my home country. I've launched it in Dubai, in the UAE, and of course now, next up has been Germany for me. So every time I go, I usually hear some kind of a variation of this question. And my answer is always that there's a little bit of me in each of the three women. Because you write based from your own experience, right? And so I will let you, as the reader, decide what parts are based on my life from each of the three women, because the three women are an amalgamation of who I am. And so I can easily be Abena, I can easily be Kate, and I can easily be Fatma. I have a lot in common with each of them. And I think that's the interesting thing about writing fiction and coming up with characters, like where do you get your inspiration from? Of course, your inspiration is from your own global life, right? And I thought it would be boring if I just had one character with all three of those characteristics. So that's why I made 3 different characters. But also the reason I have 3 characters is because, you know, for instance, my editor told me, you have 3 points of view. That's what we call it in literature. Why not just one point of view? Why don't you make your life simple and just write the novel from one point of view? And I told my editor, I don't think I can do that. Because in my head, constantly, I have at least 3 or 4 different point of views. So for me, this is the natural way to have a conversation and to tell a story from 3 different point of views. So this was easier for me to do. If I had to only write a story from Fatma's lens, I couldn't have done it. Because you see, my lens has changed so much and keeps changing that I had to have Kate and I had to have Abena. And I think that based on what readers have, you know, the feedback that they've given, all 3 of the women are flawed. They're broken. They've done things in their past they're not happy about. They have failures. They're trying to become better. And some of them succeed and some of them don't. And I must admit, I took a leaf out of Jane Austen's books. You know, Jane Austen, like the characters that she likes, they go through a process of self-discovery and growth. And the characters that she deems are not redeemable, so they experience no growth. So for example, Elizabeth Bennet goes through growth. Mr. Darcy goes through growth. Lydia Bennet goes through absolutely no growth, right? She's just the same frivolous Lydia in the end as she is in the beginning. So I think that you'll see that through my characters. You know, some of them struggle to come to terms with who they are, and some of them manage to do it, and some of them are on their way to do it. So it's really different, but it's to show that, again, the diversity of human experience. We're all different, and we all deal with it in a different way. And I will give the mic to my husband to answer your last question as to which character does he love the most, or perhaps, oh, thank you. Thank you. Möchtest du herkommen?
I can look up the room. No, I think you kind of answered already, right? That they are an amalgamation of 3 people, right? And there's some stuff which is completely made up. So I also don't want you to read the book and then think, oh my God, this is like, no. There is some stuff which is definitely made up. But there is some stuff which is very, very much rooted in truth, I would say, you know? And I think the book covers, 13 different countries, something like that, and they're not chosen at random. They're all countries that we've lived in, that we've got a relationship with, you know, and where we feel, and I'm saying we because, yes, when she had that cork board, when she was, you know, plotting it all out, whatever, I was sitting there in the evening and also giving her feedback. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? I think that's the part that I like doing, you know, just throwing out ideas, putting it on paper, she's better with that, you know, but just, what about this? And how do you link it to that? No, this doesn't make sense, you know? But yeah. So some stuff is completely made up, which was fun, you know, but there's, you know, a lot in all 3 of them. So no, I can't choose, I'm sorry. And that's actually by design, it's not by accident.
He was my editor till he was replaced by professionals at a certain point.
I think there's a question from the
Yes,
audience
of course.
that are streamed in. So Yes, exactly. First of all, we have a lot of people wishing you all the best and thanking you. We have someone watching from Dallas, Texas, Pakistan, and of course Kassel, Germany. And we have Zara with a question. She wants to know, how did you manage to find time to write with 3 young children? Absolutely loved how all the characters from different backgrounds come together so nicely.
Oh, thank you. This question was from Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Zara, for this question. I write when my kids are in school. Very thankful to their teachers and their school for keeping them. My youngest has just turned, he's 4.5 now, so when I started writing it, he was about 1.5, maybe 18 months. And he would go to a little nursery, kindergarten for 3 hours from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. And I would use those 3 hours as if my life depended on it. I didn't do any groceries or housework or anything. Those 3 hours were always just to sit and write, because I had to make the most out of those 3 hours every day. And so you really prioritize your time. You learn to use it wisely. And I have to say that becoming a mother has taught me to really be very productive in a short period of time. You don't have time to procrastinate, to check your emails and respond to WhatsApps. There will be a time for that later in the day. But when the kids are in school, you maximize every minute and you make the most out of it. So I would drop him and then quickly go to a cafe nearby, order a coffee, order a granola bowl, and sit down and just start writing. And then 3 hours maximum, just use every single minute. But of course, the kids have also inspired me to shape some of the characters that are in the book, because the book also has many children. So it's a process of them inspiring me, and what it's like to move to a new country with a young child. A lot of that experience of motherhood finds its way in the pages as well. So thank you for that question. And there's another question? Yeah. Yes.
The children are at school. I go to a cafe and start writing my novel. You don't sit at a desk at home in the peace and quiet of your office or whatever like that. But you enjoy being in a cafe with lots of people around you.
That's a very good question. I shouldn't admit this publicly
because my husband's sitting right there, and I fought very hard to have a home office. So now he's going to ask me, why don't you use it either? I do use it, of course. I use it for calls and taking many different things. But it can be very hard to concentrate when you're at home, You might wander to the kitchen and say, oh, I didn't turn the dishwasher on. I need to turn on the next load. Someone else will call you. Your neighbor will call out. There's so much work to be done that you're very distracted at home. And you've got the internet, which is the worst thing ever, honestly, for any writer. So the reason for me sitting in a cafe is I would choose cafes in Portugal that have the worst Wi-Fi connection, which isn't very hard to find. Because I don't need Wi-Fi. I just need to sit and focus and write and not be distracted by messages coming in and WhatsApps coming in and emails coming in. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is that because I was writing the book in Portugal, I found that when people around me were speaking Portuguese, I could just tune it out. It didn't bother me. I wasn't consciously paying attention. Had they been speaking in English, maybe I'm distracted, or what is she ordering, or who's that? Then your mind starts to wander. But because it's happening in a language that's not my own, that I have learned and I'm learning still, but I find it easier to shut it, off, to shut my mind off. Imagine you go to Iceland and everybody around you is speaking Icelandic. You don't know what they're saying. You can just shut it off. You can just, do what you need to do. So ironically, being in a foreign country helps you to focus better because you don't get distracted. And on the other hand, every writer needs to be a good observer of society. Half of writing is about observing. who comes into the cafe, who's wearing what do they order, how do they look, are they happy, are they annoyed? You know, that's the kind of observations that make it into your writing. And so there's a bit of that creative process as well, that you need a bit of that. So sometimes having a change of scenery can actually be helpful for your creativity. But I will also say I did spend plenty of days at home as well. But it's a fine balance for sure.
I would like to ask a more personal question, not directly about the book, but you said you lived in 10 countries.
Yes.
I lived in 4 only, but it's always advantage and disadvantage wherever you go. And I'm wondering if you have like a top 10, like what is the country you like the most? What is the country you think like it was hardest to adjust to? Is there something you can say quickly like, oh, this, or you know, that's the best, or that was the hardest? And that's the first part of my question. The second is, once you have to require in many years, can you decide where you want to live? I know it's very personal, I hope it's not too personal, but it would be very exciting to hear from somebody who has such a big experience.
Sure. That's the $1 million question, the last one. But let me answer your first question first, which was about living in so many different countries. Yes, I have lived, I will list them chronologically. I have lived in the Kingdom of Bahrain, then the United States, then Pakistan, then the United States again, then the UK, then back to the US, and then to Germany, then Denmark, then Singapore, then the UAE, then Ghana, and then Portugal, which is where I currently live. So 10 countries and 4 continents later, my life is very messy. And that was the topic of my first book, Das verruchte Mobilleben. And it's very hard to answer what has been the best experience. It's kind of like choosing my favorite child, and I have 3. So it's a difficult question to answer, but I think that, you know, each country teaches you something, right? Each country helps you to grow in a certain way. And not through just amazing experiences, but through tough experiences, through challenges as well. So I think that the country that helped me to grow a lot was Ghana, living in West Africa. It was such a beautiful opportunity to live in that corner of the world. How often do you get to live in West Africa, right? It was such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you know, we really wanted to grab it. And so I think that opening yourself up to a culture that is so different from what you may be used to. And there are challenges, you know, there's poverty, there's malaria. We moved to Ghana with a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old from Dubai, and everyone said, are you crazy? Why are you moving from Dubai to Ghana, where, you know, you need to probably take anti-malarial pills, or, you know, so it's a very different experience. Everybody wants to live in New York. You live in Copenhagen, or people will say, oh, that's great. Or when we moved to Dubai, people will say, oh, you've hit the jackpot. Really? But when we moved to Ghana, nobody said you've hit the jackpot. Instead, people looked at us like we were crazy. And I think for me, that is what made it so special, that not everybody gets to do it. Not everybody says yes to it. And here we are, you know, with the perfect opportunity to experience life there. And for me, I think that was the best part, because we lived every single day there to the fullest, because we didn't know it could end tomorrow. You know, in the corporate world, jobs change very quickly. You're in Dubai 1 minute, the oil price is down, the Middle East isn't doing well. Next thing you know, your assignment gets cut short. So there's no guarantee, there's no security. But I think the important thing is to treat each adventure in its own right and to give it the importance. So in Ghana, we felt that we really lived. Someone else might say, oh, but we've got so many problems there. The electricity keeps going. You need a generator to, do anything. But we didn't really see all of that. Like, that didn't affect us so much. Yes, the electricity goes, but that's not what defines my life. I get to experience a new culture. I get to try a new cuisine. I get to see people in the market carrying things on their head, like huge baskets full of yams and potatoes and snails. And I'm wondering, what are they going to make with that when they get back home? So I think that that is the beauty when you open yourself to a very different way of living. I would also choose Denmark as one of my favorites, which always surprises people because, if you've been to Copenhagen, the sun doesn't shine there very much. It's dark and it can be depressing. And, many people in Denmark suffer from seasonal affective disorder because sometimes you don't see the sun for 2 to 3 months in the winter time. Of course, in the summertime, you have really long nights and the sun doesn't set till 11 p.m. So that's a whole other challenge, But I think that Danish society values egalitarianism, and that's something I really did enjoy, especially coming from the US. In the US, I was too scared to walk into my boss's office and say, oh, I have this idea. But in Denmark, I could do it. In Copenhagen, I could walk into the head of the department's office and say, I have this idea, I'd love to discuss it with you. And nobody would turn me away. So it was a less hierarchical system of working, which I really enjoyed. So really, every place has offered something of value. But if I were to choose some favorites, I would probably choose Ghana and Denmark. And your last question, the $1 million one. I'll be very honest and say, I don't know. I don't know where we would retire. I think being in an intercultural marriage makes it even harder because what's home for one person may not be home for another. So it's complicated. And we figure out that sometimes we work best, abroad, where a neutral ground, exactly, where neither of us is from, but we can build a life there and figure it out together. So, yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask one question? Somebody in the back? You want to ask? You? Then I ask my question. I wanted to come back to what you explained at the beginning and also to the title of your book, The Guilty Can't Say Goodbye. Yeah. As you've seen, as you were explaining it, Jürgen and I, we were laughing. We were super referring to discussions we had. Mm-hmm. How would you describe, as you did a lot of research with people that lived in their own country and moved, to the fact that baggage or guilt or your personality, things that you're not happy with, are gonna get, you go through a process, or you postpone it, because that was one of the things that we said, we're moving every 2 years. I'm too busy to focus on myself because I'm busy on focusing on a new country. And it was also sometimes super easy for us to say, oh, that's not a real problem, because we have problems. Would you say that it's more difficult for people that are moving and are expatriates to get rid of those old problems and baggage?
Yeah. Oh, that's a deep question. I think we can often be our own worst enemy. Yeah, we question ourselves, we doubt ourselves, we don't believe in ourselves, and sometimes when you are constantly moving every 2 to 3 years, you unseemingly adopt a very transient approach to life. You think, oh, I just need to get through the next 1 year or next 2 years, and then my life will change. So you don't think in the long term anymore, because you simply can't. That's a reality. You don't know what you're going to be doing in 5 years. You don't know where you'll be doing it. You don't know whether you'll be happy doing it. So you stop thinking about the long term. And I think that this is a challenge I've also faced as well. I would move to a new country and say, oh, I just need to find a job. I just need to get through life here. I just need to make the most out of it. It's temporary. But the problem with only thinking short term is that we do ourselves a big disservice because we forget about our goals and we forget about our dreams and we forget to dream big, which is something that all of us need to do. Our dreams should be so big that they keep us up at night, you know. Why are we so scared to dream big? And I think dreaming big is something really valuable. We all should be doing it. We should all be aiming for the stars and not holding ourselves back, not thinking I'm only in Wolfsburg for 2 years and then I'm in China or then I don't know where I'll be. I think that that's a trap and some of us take time to come out of it. And this, you know, you learn with practice, but it's very important to do that. It's very important to not lose sight of your goals in the whole process of redefining your own identity and living your life. I think it's a hard thing to do. It's easier said than done. But I definitely think that it's important to stay true to who you are and to dream big. No matter if you're living in Dubai or you're living in Paris, you know yourself, you know your goals, and you can still go after them in a way that you stay true to who you are. So that is really important, and don't get distracted. Thank you.
Questions? Oh. Yeah, last but not least, maybe, you mentioned a lot of times the number 3
Yes.
In your presentation and in your family and in the story. So, are you already planning to write the third book?
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. I do believe all good things come in 3. I have 3 children. That's one aspect of my life. And for sure, I would love to write a third book. For me, a book is kind of like having a baby. There is, you know, all the excitement, all the anxiety with it. And when it's born, you know it's coming. Like, you've seen the ultrasound. You know it's coming. But when it comes, it's still as miraculous and surprising as, you know, a birth is. So yes, definitely. Hopefully there will be another book in the future. I have written a nonfiction book and then moved to writing fiction, and the jump from writing nonfiction to fiction has been huge. I kept asking myself, why am I doing this to myself every single day? But there are so many stories that I still want to share. I still want to share a lot more multicultural food and recipes. I did a little bit of it in The Guilty Can't Say Goodbye, but there's more of it that I'd like to share. I'd also like to share short stories, maybe 10 short stories based on the 10 countries I've lived in. And last but not least, when I'm at least over 50, I will write a memoir. When I've experienced life a bit more. I feel that right now I'm not quite there yet, but perhaps that will be the last book. So yeah, I'm already thinking of book number 3, 4, and 5 to answer your question. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Last thing that I learned that I'm ready for memoirs already. I don't know how I can deal with it. Dear Mariam, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much to Marlies for sending me the book and making me aware of it. I already know it. And thanks for sharing your experiences and the book with all of us. I'm grateful. I'm looking forward to invite you with number 3 and your whole family again. And I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you for coming. Thanks for asking questions. Thank you to the audience in the stream. Thank you for asking questions. And we hope to see you all again to the next event of the Internationale Freundeskreis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Oh, thank you so much. much for having me. I also have a present for you. Ha!
That's nice. I definitely invite you again. Thank you so much.
There should be a card as well. Oh, hold on 1 second.
See? You get interesting people, you get also interesting presents. So if you want to grab a drink outside and maybe discuss and have a look at her books, she will be outside also signing the books for you.
Here.
Thank you.
Grab my glass.